They're an anime that everyone talks about. One Piece, Naruto, Bleach, and Hunter x Hunter. And then they're an anime that make you wonder, how the hell do people forget about this? Today, we're talking about one of those series, Air Gear, a series about teenagers, rollerblades, rival gangs, insane battles, ridiculous powers, and a world that somehow becomes way deeper than you expect. And despite having an incredible manga, a memorable cast, and some of the coolest action concepts in Shonen, and one of the most unique styles I've ever seen, Air Gear is criminally underrated. And today, I'm gonna give you 10 reasons why. First, the concept is absolutely insane. At first, Air Gear sounds incredibly simple. People rollerblade. That's basically it. Except it's not. The series takes rollerblading and turns it into an entire combat system. These aren't normal rollerblades. They're called air tracks, and skilled riders can use them to perform ridiculous movements, fight opponents, race across cities, and eventually pull off feats that look almost supernatural. And that's what makes Air Gear so fun. The series starts with something grounded and familiar and then keeps asking, okay, but what if we took this way too far? Eventually, riding isn't just about speed. It's about technique, strategy, teamwork, and even personal identity. Different riders develop completely different styles, and the air tracks become an extension of who they are. That's a fantastic foundation for a battle manga. The second reason is Air Gear's artwork. The character designs become more elaborate, the action becomes more dynamic, the environments become massive, and the fights can feel less like you've been reading a manga and more like you're watching somebody's imagination explode across the page. There's also a ridiculous amount of detail in the movement. You could practically feel the characters accelerating across the page. And that's important because Air Gear is fundamentally a series about movement. The manga understands that. The art isn't just pretty, the art is part of the storytelling. The third reason is this: the characters actually have personality. One of the best things about Air Gear is its cast. At the center is Ikki, and he's basically a walking disaster. He's loud, he's reckless, he's competitive, he's arrogant, and somehow he's incredibly easy to root for. But the supporting cast is where the series really shine. You have characters with completely different personalities, motivations, abilities, and relationships with writing. And the teams are especially interesting because Air Gear isn't just about becoming the strongest individual. It's heavily focused on crews, people who ride together, people who trust each other, people who compete with each other, people who sometimes absolutely hate each other. That creates a surprisingly strong sense of camaraderie. And the fourth reason is this: the world building gets way deeper than you expect. This is probably one of the biggest reasons people who haven't read Air Gear underestimate it. You look at the premise and think, it's a manga about rollerblade. That's just boring. Then you're suddenly learning about different roads, kings, regalia, teams, rival organizations, and increasingly complicated mechanics behind the air tracks. The series develops an entire culture around riding. There are rankings, competitions, crews, legends, specialized equipment, and different philosophies about what it means to ride. The world keeps expanding, and honestly, that's part of what makes the manga so addictive. You start reading because you want to see cool skating fights. Then suddenly you're invested in entirely mythology surrounding the sport. The fifth reason is this: the action is way more creative than it has any right to be. Air Gear has some genuinely creative fights because the characters aren't just standing in an arena throwing punches, they're moving constantly. They're using buildings, roads, walls, railings, air currents, their equipment, their opponents, and their surroundings. That creates fights where positioning and movement actually matter. A character isn't necessarily winning because they're physically stronger. They might win because they're faster, smarter, more experienced, or because they understand their opponent's riding style. It's essentially battle shonen mixed with extreme sports, and that's a combination you don't see very often. Number 6 reason is this: the anime doesn't tell the whole story. Now this is where things get complicated. If you watched the Air Gear anime and thought, that's it? I completely understand. The anime is fun, it has style, it has memorable moments, but it doesn't fully represent what the manga eventually becomes. The manga continues much further and becomes considerably more ambitious. The story expands, the fights get crazier, the characters develop further, and the overall mythology becomes much more complicated. So if your only experience with Air Gear is the manga, you haven't really experienced the full story. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons the series gets overlooked today. A lot of people simply never got the complete adaptation they needed. 7th reason: it's a perfect product of its era. There's also something special about the era Air Gear came from. The 2000s had a very particular kind of anime energy. Everything was louder, everything was more exaggerated. Characters had ridiculous hairstyles, soundtracks went incredibly hard, and shows weren't afraid to completely embrace their own insanity. Air Gear fits perfectly into that era. It had this rebellious, underground feeling. It's stylish, it's edgy, it's occasionally completely ridiculous. And instead of trying to be realistic, it wanted to be cool. And honestly, sometimes that's exactly what anime needs. The 8th reason: it's weird. And that's a good thing. One reason I think Air Gear has aged surprisingly well is because it doesn't feel like everything else. You can find hundreds of battle anime. You can find hundreds of sports anime. You can find hundreds of stories about teenagers becoming stronger. But how many stories are about teenagers riding futuristic rollerblades while participating in increasingly absurd battles involving elaborate teams and supernatural level abilities? Exactly. Air Gear has an identity. You might love it. You might hate it. You might even think it's completely insane. But you probably won't confuse it with something else. And that's valuable. The ninth reason. It's not perfect. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend Air Gear is flawless. It isn't. The story can get extremely complicated. Some plot developments are absolutely wild. The fan service can be excessive. The power scaling gets ridiculous. And sometimes you may gently ask yourself, what am I even reading anymore? But that's also a part of the charm. Air Gear is ambitious. It swings for the fences. Sometimes it hits. Sometimes it completely misses. But I'd rather have a series with a distinct identity that takes big creative swings than something that feels completely safe. And number 10. So why is Air Gear so underrated? Ultimately, I think Air Gear got caught in a weird situation. It had the potential to be remembered alongside the biggest shonen series of its generation, but the anime didn't fully adapt the manga. The concept sounds silly if you describe it in one sentence. The series becomes increasingly complicated, and it belongs to an era that doesn't get talked about as much as the modern anime boom. But if you actually give the manga a chance, you understand why people still remember it. Because underneath all the craziness, Air Gear is a story about freedom. It's about competition. It's about finding people who share your passion. It's about pushing yourself beyond your limits. And most importantly, it's about flying. Not literally at first, but that's what writing represents to these characters. The ability to move beyond the limitations placed on them, to find their own road, and to keep moving forward. So if you never experienced Air Gear, I seriously recommend checking out the manga. Don't judge it solely by the premise. Don't assume it's just another 2000s battle anime. And definitely don't assume the anime tells you everything the series has to offer. Because Air Gear is one of those weird, ambitious, completely insane series that you just end up loving. And at the very least, never forget. And maybe that's exactly why it deserves to be remembered. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like and follow and stay tuned for more. And let me know in the comments what other underrated anime or manga deserves a video. Because there's a lot of them. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, find your road.